Let's take you live now to Sydney, where Foreign Minister Marise Payne is also speaking about the coronavirus situation.
People will be safer if they continue to follow the advice that is being given by health authorities, both in Australia and in China. That does mean avoiding major gatherings, staying away from crowded areas as much as possible, and following strict hygiene precautions. From Australia's perspective, we are looking very closely at what is possible, including consular assistance for people who are in those areas and what options there are for helping them with transport out of Wuhan and Hubei province. We're exploring all opportunities to ensure that when it is possible, we can assist their departure. Our officials have held extensive discussions, including earlier today, with partner countries that are in the same situation. I am also speaking to my counterparts who find themselves in the same situation, or at least their countries do, I should say. We're in close consultation with the Chinese authorities as well, particularly from our embassy in Beijing and from our consulate in Shanghai. Australia does not have a consular presence on the ground in Wuhan. We have trade officials, but not a specific consular presence as such. It is, I think, very important to appreciate that there are limitations to what we can do. As I said, we don't have a consular presence on the ground, so getting in to help, given the travel restrictions, continues to be a significant difficulty. And we also have to remind ourselves, I think, that the Chinese government has placed the travel restrictions in place in these areas to contain the coronavirus outbreak itself. So we are and we need to continue to work cooperatively with them in the best interests of everyone. We're treating this situation with the utmost seriousness. We're holding discussions again this afternoon to determine as quickly as possible how we are able to help. I do want to reiterate that I absolutely understand the emotion and the concern that many Australians have about family members who are currently in this region in China. It is an extremely stressful experience for them. I would encourage all Australians who believe they have family members in this part of China to please contact our consular emergency line. You're able to do that on a 1300 number, 1300 555 135. It's necessary to call from outside Australia, which in some cases, of course, in these circumstances, it may be. The number is +61 2 62 61 3305. Please make contact with those emergency lines that will assist the Australian government in understanding where Australians are, who is in the region, and in that course of events, what support we may be required to give should we be able to do so. Thank you all very much.
Do you have an indication of how many Australian residents or nationals are in the lockdown provinces?
There's a number of numbers floating around, but in fact I think it's difficult to be accurate about that. We have had over 380 calls to the emergency line so far. But of course, people are able to travel if they are dual nationals on another passport, in this case potentially a Chinese passport. We will not necessarily have the records which would indicate how many have travelled on another passport. So we are very much relying on people notifying us of their presence in the region. As I said, the emergency consular line has already taken over 385 calls. That is some indication for us of the sort of numbers that we are looking at the moment. We also appreciate that at this time of year, in Australia, the long summer holidays and Christmas focus, in China particularly the Lunar New Year celebrations, that does increase the numbers of families travelling for events and family gatherings. So that means we are very conscious that we need to work with the community to understand those numbers and to provide us with that information.
Can you confirm the 100 children already reported, aged between 6 months and 16, or is it more?
Well, it's a reported number, but it's not a number that I'm able to confirm because I don't have consular officials on the ground, and I am relying on contact with the emergency consular line. We'll be discussing these aspects further later today with senior ministers and the Prime Minister, and our efforts to try to determine those numbers are a key part of the work we're doing at the moment.
To extrapolate from those phone calls, 385 phone calls, are we talking then several hundred Australians, less than 1,000? Is there any way you can give us what that might indicate?
I don't think you can speculate about that. I mean, obviously I'm asking family members who may have family in the region to make contact. That doesn't mean that that is a joined-up, coordinated approach. Multiple family members may make contact about the same individuals. So we have to be very careful about that and work very carefully with our resources in China, both in Beijing and in Shanghai, and with our resources here in the emergency consular call team to make sure we're keeping an eye on those numbers.
And the consular officials trying to get in from the Beijing embassy or from the Shanghai consulate?
We are making inquiries about that, but of course the travel restrictions placed on the region by Chinese authorities are placed there for precisely the purpose of containing the coronavirus. So we're very conscious of that, and we need to abide by those travel restrictions, and that is the approach that we are taking.
When you talk about your partner countries and your counterparts who are in a similar situation, does that also extend to them not knowing how many of their citizens are in the danger area, or is that just Australia who seemingly doesn't know the numbers?
I think this is an issue for many countries. I can't speak specifically for other nations, but I do know that there is significant effort being made by other countries to determine what the number of their citizens in the area is, and therefore what the size of the cohort looks like. I would have to also say that Australia, as I've said, does not have a consular presence in Wuhan. Other countries do. That will make it somewhat easier for them to have on-the-ground engagement with members of their own community.
Are you relying upon any of those countries that do have the consular presence in the city itself?
Not necessarily relying on, but certainly in communication with a number of other countries who are dealing with the same problem.
Which countries?
Well, a number of countries. I'm not going to go into specifics, but obviously there are many countries who have broad Chinese diaspora and who will have family members in a place like Wuhan.
If Australia is able to get its citizens out, what might happen to them next? France has talked about another quarantine area somewhere else in China. The US has talked about a charter flight to San Francisco. Has the planning been done about what might happen next if people are able to get out of Hubei province?
So health authorities will obviously be considering the implications for that process. That is one of the reasons why we are also focused on directing people's attention to the health advice that is being provided by both Chinese authorities and by Australian authorities, minimising any possibility of contracting coronavirus in this context, if we are to be able to move people, is a very important part of this.
What advice are you giving to relatives of Australians in those regions in terms of how long it might take, weeks or months, to get them out if they are to be got out?
We are not speculating on the amount of time that it may take to do this. This is a complex process. It's a very, very fast-moving situation. Even in the last day, and I'm sure you have all been watching the reports as I have, Chinese health authorities have made updates to the nature of the virus and the nature of its transmission. It is very, very complex. So I think it would be unwise to speculate about the length of time it may take to address this issue. But most importantly, I think there have been clear instructions put in place by the Chinese authorities about moving around the region, moving in and out of the region, and also health advice. And the health advice, as I said, goes to staying away from major gatherings, away from crowded areas as much as possible, following very strict hygiene precautions. And for anyone who is in the region, that is absolutely imperative. We are updating our Smart Traveller advice as well. I would also encourage people to review that and to subscribe to that.
What would be your preferred approach for extracting Australians? Would it be to elsewhere in China or straight back here?
I think this will be dictated by the circumstances, and the circumstances are not yet defined. We don't know when, and we don't know whether it is a short-term process in which we'll be able to support Australians who are there. We have to work closely with the Chinese authorities. We have to share with our international counterparts, as I've indicated. And so I think to say we have a preferred approach or not is not an accurate representation of the situation at the moment.